They are the publishers of Colossive Press, which is an amazing small press publisher that does these really like great tactile, interactive, sort of unique formats of comics that really kind of challenge artists to kind of draw and tell stories in a unique way, as well as they do photography and other mediums as well. So they're going to be giving us a presentation on their work, and then afterwards, if you have any questions about what they do, and as well, they have a table in the hall. You can please go take a look at their comics. I'll hand it over to you guys.
Thank you.
I'm going to stand up. Look at me. Thanks, Laura. Well, yes, we're Jane and Tom. We've managed to get to the combined age of 896 without ever having to do public speaking apart from weddings and funerals. So please bear with us, and if we start scrabbling around in our notes and asking you if you've been to Peppa World, just please be kind. Yeah, so the only other public speaking we did was online for LD Comics back in January. And for that presentation we came up with the Colossive Manifesto. And that was really a tongue-in-cheek thing. We would never think to lecture anybody, but it seemed to strike a chord with quite a few people. So we thought, oh well, we'll go with that. And we got some postcards printed, which you can all pick up later. And we thought we'd use it to structure our ramblings today. So basically, another name for this talk could be, if we can do it, anyone can, and here's why you should. So point one is, whatever your story is, it's worth telling. And I'll get out of the way, but that is an exchange on WhatsApp that I had with my very accomplished, talented friend Victoria, who has launched a zine today here about her experience of the menopause. And it just shows those moments of self-doubt we all have, like, oh, I'm just rambling on about myself, and who cares? And the answer to that is everyone cares, because all our stories matter. And the version of history that we've been handed down is obviously very swayed towards kings and queens and battles and all the big names, but actually the people that keep the world going are the ordinary people, and it's the little stories, the everyday things that we pass on that enable us to learn and progress, and the stories are what connect us. So, yeah, that who'd be interested in me? Like, I'm not sure that would be of interest to anyone else, says Victoria. I volunteer for a few projects at St Christopher's Hospice, which is just down the road. Oral histories, hospice biographers, and the care of support. Absolutely everyone at some point says, you know, well, who'd be interested in my story? I know I've just had a really boring life, and no one's had a boring life. As I say, that is what connects us and what drives us forward. So it's really important with things like DIY culture and zines in general that we are just telling one another the big stories and the little stories. I want to say next slide, please, but that's last year. So this is a zine that we published quite early on by Yeston Pettigrew. It's a really lovely, simple little zine. It's got pictures of the inside of an accessible toilet, and Yeston's very impassioned essay about what it's like to parent a teenager with hidden special needs, because every time his son needs to go to the loo in public, Yeston has to be with him. So he's absolutely in turmoil, thinking, you know, what must people think, and how do I make it obvious what's going on without humiliating my son? And yet he just sums it up so beautifully, and it's a kind of everyday thing, like, here's a zine about a bloke going to the loo, and you think, but actually it gives us insight and interest, and it's done in a really lovely way. Again, it's a good example of a little story that teaches us something as well as entertains. And who'd have thought a toilet could be that attractive. And then this is another one, the aforementioned Victoria. Again, this is more throwaway humour, but a little story about every time she goes away, she feels increasingly guilty about leaving her cat. And so she starts to feel more and more guilty as the trip progresses. At first just other cats remind her of her cat, and then things with cats suddenly remind her of her cat, and in the end street furniture reminds her of her cat and she has to go home. And I'll just point out that is Colossive's much missed first Chief of Staff, Sid. And then here's my fridge magnet slide, so I just wanted to put that in there to remind me to say it, which is basically every story matters.
Okay, so point number 2 on the manifesto was be inspired, not intimidated by other people's work. And just as an aside, this gentleman here is my lovely old dad, doing one of the many jobs he did throughout his life, driving the Continental Express, which was a little train that went up and down Redcar Beach back in the black and white days. And the reason he's there is because it's thanks to him that we're Colossive Press, because he left school in the rural west of Ireland when he was 13, and he always had a slightly eccentric relationship with English language. And a word he just invented one day was Colossive, for something that was very big and very impressive, and we thought, with tickling irony, that would be a good name for our small press. But you know, it's lovely that every day we have some connection with my dad. So anyway, back to the point. If you're anything like us, then the first stumbling block you're going to come across when you have a notion for a story to tell is that other people are doing it a lot better. I mean, you just walk around upstairs and you see all this fantastic work and you think, oh, I could never, not nowadays necessarily, but you know, you think, oh, I could never do anything like that. These people are so accomplished. You know, every year there's thousands of illustration graduates come out and are terribly technically proficient. They can do everything, and it seems like, oh, I could never compete with that. But you're not competing, because you know what you're saying is your story. You know, you're the only person who can really tell it. You're drawing on your experience in your life up to that point, everything that's influenced you. So, you know, you should persevere and just tell your story the way you can do it. And of course, we're talking about stories, not just autobiographical stories. I mean, whatever you do, whether it's comedy, satire, fiction, it's all going to reflect who you are and what's got you to where you are now and what your view on the world is. So for instance, this is part of Jane's body of work, President of Chance's Penge Sculpture Trail. And that just came about from finding all this fly tip stuff around the streets of Penge every day pretty much, and just imagining that there was some, you know, pretentious artist behind it, and it was part of their sculpture trail. So we did the lavishly illustrated guide, and James just for today done a map which is in the same format as our cartographies.
That one at the top is Penge's worst escapologist. He's been under there for 2.5 years.
Social distancing taken to its extreme. So yeah, so like I say, you know, whatever you do, just something you see every day can spark that idea and, you know, pursue it. And similarly, Croydon Spaceport, which was a half-baked notion I had just the first time I came to Croydon. It just looked so fantastically science-fictional and like something out of Thunderbirds or Stingray for kids of a certain generation. And you know, that just developed, and I'll explain a bit more about how that developed later. But you know, it became the zine and bits of merchandise. But, you know, it was just a silly idea which I gradually fluffed up, and it became something. It became a zine, and I'm very proud of it. So, I mean, just more generally, I sort of, you know, there's a lot of talk about imposter syndrome and, oh, I can't do that, I don't belong here. But, you know, Jane was sick of me for years, boo-hooing around the house because I wasn't doing anything creative, or I felt like I was a bit of an outsider, and I was watching all these people do, you know, go to Gosh every Friday night, wishing it was me, sort of signing books and what have you. But, you know, people generally really don't know much better than you do, and certainly they don't know your story better than you do. So, I'd done small press stuff years ago in the 90s when I was in my 20s, and then sort of in my mid-40s, late 40s, I sort of really wanted a creative outlet. And I started going to events like LCAF, there was the Paul Garrett's Comic-Cat, there does seem to be like an upswing in small press activity, people, DIY culture, people doing their own stuff. So, I just started making a couple of zines. I'd asked to co-write was one of them, High Precision Ghost, which up until in a minute was another. And made their debut here at this event in 2018. I had them on the communal table, and without being too cosmic, there's no inside or there's no outside. If you make a zine, you're on the inside, you're suddenly part of it. So that's why they call it DIY culture. Okay, so the next point is communicate and collaborate. And what this marvellous array of stuff here is our Colossive cartography series, which we started just over 2 years ago, and it's flourished into this. And the point is, one of the brilliant things about DIY culture is just how collaborative people are, and everyone wants to get involved and help each other generally. I think there's not too many sort of prima donnas out there. And a lot of this, initially we thought there might be one or two, half a dozen maybe, and now we're issue 41, and we've got others in the pipeline from artists we really admire. And it's just, it comes about really, if you just admire someone's work, if you enjoy what they're doing, just tell them, drop them an email or a DM or whatever, if people send emails. Because you never know where that's going to lead. I mean, if we go back right to the very start, there were sort of a few personal acquaintances, people we sat next to at fairs and things. But it just sort of, then we started approaching people, we'd see work online that we thought would fit the format. In case you're wondering what Colossive cartography is, by the way, it's this, which is a Turkish map fold. So it's an A4 bit of print which folds up nicely into an A6 cover and pops open. We've got all of them on our table. So we just spotted people on Instagram or whatever, or picked up zines and we thought, that would work nicely in the format, and got in touch with them. And everyone pretty much was really enthusiastic. Really, we thought initially it'd just be if people had one-page comics lying around they just wanted to use, but they've really done brilliant original work that uses the format, all the folds, and the physicality of it. It's always a thrill when the next one arrives because we're never sure what's going to happen. I mean, this is the latest one, number 41, Skyward Routes by Ali Hodgson, who we met when we were doing the LD Comics talk in January, and she's tied that into the Croydon Spaceport universe. So everything just kind of connects up, and it's brilliant. And we've sort of tried to get people from different disciplines, authors, illustrators and comics people, obviously, photographers, writers. I mean, Jeff, where is he?
There.
Jeff Young, who's a playwright, broadcaster, essayist. He was nominated for the Colossive Book Award the other year. And we just spotted that he was doing these sort of notebook collages that he was putting on Instagram, which looked like they were perfect for the format, which they were. And so we approached him, and he produced this lovely original bit of work. And he's a very acclaimed writer. So, it's just get in touch with people. We're not pushy. We're not sort of people who corner people at parties and get stuff out of them. If you just enjoy someone's work, you're never going to regret telling them that. And if you're on the receiving end of it, it's fantastic as well. So that's the cartographies as a whole. This is just to illustrate how it grew. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Book Art Bookshop in Hoxton, run by a wonderful woman called Tanya. She discovered them. And this was last summer, so not that, well, a fair way into the project, but she gave us a window display and showed them off, so that was fantastic. Gosh Comics, I've started stocking them, which I started shopping at Gosh when I moved to London in 1986, so that was quite a... It's another way, if you just start with one project, I would say you get one page, just get one little item together, that can be the catalyst that gets the ball rolling. I'm going to metaphor there, but... Okay, and again, sorry, just to labour the point, today we're launching this zine by Patrick Ray, who I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with him. He's annoyingly multi-talented. He's a writer, artist, musician, and we just noticed he'd ordered some stuff from us, and I recognised his name and really liked his work. So when we sent him the stuff, we dropped the notes in it, just saying, if you'd ever be interested, we're looking for collaborators for the Cartographies project. And he agreed and produced a lovely bit of work called Mirror Mirror, which again, I mean, you can just see it uses the format beautifully. And then, further down the line, he said, I've got this other project you might be interested in working, collaborating on, which is Ghost Stories I Remember, which is a series of anecdotes about possible encounters with the supernatural and paranormal, some of them mundane, some of them comical, some of them genuinely unsettling, which he's illustrated beautifully, and he's written it in a tribute to Joe Brainard. I don't know if you know, he's an experimental author and artist, and he wrote an autobiography called I Remember, and every paragraph started I Remember, and it's sort of aspects of his life that he drew together. So again, one thing leads to another. And like I say, just get in touch with people, be open to the possibilities, and you never know what might happen. Next.
Yeah. So point 4 was find something you love doing and find a way to carry on doing it no matter what. And this is obviously easier said than done depending on what it is you love doing. But I think as a society and within our families and friendship groups, we don't always do enough to ensure that people can carry on connecting in some way with the things they love as they get older. I think with as people age in particular, that there's something, I have this obsession with people suddenly thinking that old people want to do jigsaws and sit there in front of homes under the hammer with a cup of tea, there's a jigsaw, someone will be in 4 hours to change your pants, and that's no way to live. There is something that drives all of us, and hopefully there's lots of things and things that really cheer us up, and it could be watching TV or a sport, or it could be something cultural. My dad, Gordon Gibbons, was a very keen photographer. I think he first got a camera in his 20s. That's him in Portugal in 1961. And after my mum died in 1995, Dad never went back to work. He was in his early 60s. And he started spending more time out and about in London with his camera. And he stumbled across all sorts of things, as we discovered later, but he really got into graffiti and street art, and it was before street art was even a term, I think. He got to know a lot of the graffiti writers, and I've since learned, they thought he was some kind of neighbourhood watch snitch when he first turned up taking loads of pictures, but then he became friends with them, and it became like it did become obsessive, but it was a real hobby for him because it was changing all the time. He was getting out, moving around with his camera, going to all the glamorous spots like Stockwell Hall of Fame. And then as he got older, in 2012, when he was 81, he was diagnosed with cancer. And I was devastated. He was nonplussed. He'd had cancer before. And all he wanted to do was still go out and photograph graffiti and street art. So that's
almost up the day you got the diagnosis, right?
Yeah.
To go.
Right, come on, hurry up. It's like, what did he say again? Because he couldn't hear that, so I'd have to repeat it all. He said you had cancer. Well, come on, let's go stop that. And it carried that through all the horrible hospital trips and medical appointments, and all the confusion and chaos that goes with something like cancer. That was just driven by this love of graffiti and street art, and it did get more difficult as years went by. He turned out to have not one but 2 cancers, and I used to really worry where he was. So luckily I'm freelance, work from home, and I could, that's in bothering Thierry Noir. Someone asked him what his name was at Stockwell, he said, Mr. Gibbons, so they wrote it on the board. That's him, by Trellick Tower. He was good friends with Stick, who I think is probably second only to Banksy in the graffiti big names. And for a while we thought Dad was Banksy, because he turned up everywhere taking pictures before it had even hit the news when Banksy had done a new one. And he months they'd get that phone call, Banksy's done a new one. And you know, Dad would leave London to go and see a Banksy. But yeah, I could start going with him because I was worried about him. And I'd be like, we'd be walking along by the canal and think, oh, who's this coming towards us? And then they'd all come up and go, hello, Gordon. You know, like, he just knew everybody. And it just gave him like almost like a second lease of life. Not that he ever lost his first, really, but anyway, I used to wish that it was closer to home. And then, as luck would have it, just as Dad was really, really unwell and trips to Shoreditch were getting more and more complicated, Tom and I don't drive, so we were having to go on public transport with Dad, and you know, sometimes I'd get him to Shoreditch and he wasn't well enough to go and look at the street art, so just being there was enough. I had to run around with his camera. Anyway, we live in Penge, and a bloke called Steve, who is the biggest street art fan ever, I'd say possibly more than that, happened to live in Penge and started this project, which some of you may know, which is Spray Exhibition 20, which is graffiti and street art in Penge. And suddenly, all Dad's favourite artists, I mean, it was still in its infancy, but they started coming to Penge. And it was just brilliant because, you know, we could get him to Penge quite easily, and we could get him to Penge even when he was in St Christopher's Hospice. You know, I'd go in there and that's Penge. You know, South Norwood, there's a terrible feud between South Norwood and and I'd get to the hospice in the morning and he'd want to go out and look at the new street art in Penge. To show the next slide, which I think is the book. So after Dad died, we inherited thousands and thousands of photographs. And there were 30,000 of graffiti and street art alone, and people kept asking, or suggesting we did a book. And what do you mean, do a book? And then we came up with the idea of, we'll do a little zine, and it turned into more than a little zine. It became How Graffiti Saved My Dad's Life, this book. And this is another example of how Tom was talking about the cartographies of just, we had no idea how it would take off and take us in so many different directions, because people related to, well, they related to Dad's story, they loved the street art, they loved Dad's spirit, they understood what we were going through as his family and carers. The hospice obviously loved it. All the money from this goes to the hospice, and we've had email, everyone picks up on a different aspect of it, and it is full of street art, but there is one spread, this is very miserable, I'm sorry, but that is towards the end, which has had the biggest response out of everything, which I will read out to you, and sorry for the downer, but this illustrates the point about doing something you love for as long as you can. So during those final few days in the hospice, whenever he was half awake, Dad kept making the same little gesture to me. He wanted his camera. I'd pass it to him and watch him turn it over and over in his hands, looking at it quizzically. I didn't think he really knew what he was doing. Back home after he'd died, I was preparing to put his final batch of pictures on Flickr. It's what he would have wanted after all. That's when I noticed he'd taken a handful of photographs from the hospice bed. They were off-kilter and out of focus, but they were all pointing towards the light on the ceiling or the sun streaming in through the curtains. Anything's better than a blank wall. And sorry, I should have said earlier that Dad, that was Dad's thing, that he didn't just like street art, you know, beautiful murals. If someone had done a tag on the side of a train, it'd be brilliant. And he lived in West Wickham, which is very suburban, and you know, the trains would be pulling in and everyone else would be tutting. And Dad would get his camera out and be very excited. So yes, anything's better than a blank wall or train or page. Anyway, just to, next slide. Steve, who runs the street art project in Penge, arranged for this mural of Dad to be done. This is us, well, this is me actually, because Tom took a picture a couple of weeks ago. So now Steve runs street art tours in Penge that are free, but Tom and I go along and badger people with a collection for the hospice and sell the books. And it is just, I mean, you can imagine, can't you? It's just absolutely amazing to see Dad out there again with his camera. All through lockdown, none of us could go anywhere, but Dad was still out there. And again, that just comes from having a story, having this stuff, not knowing what to do with it, not knowing if anyone would be interested. Because when I was thinking of it originally, I thought, oh, I'm going to tell everyone how bad it, you know, like about the whole medical experience and you know, the anxiety and stress. And actually, no, there's a really positive thing that came out of the story, which is if there's a way to carry on indulging your passion, or you find a way, which in Dad's case was us hiring a wheelchair and shouting at people on buses and things. But you know, you can get out there, and no matter what, I should say at the end, Dad couldn't eat or drink. He had a feeding tube. He couldn't hear, in a wheelchair, and you'd look and you'd think, oh, would you like a jigsaw? But actually, no, what he wanted to do was go out and look at street art. So that's what we did. Yeah, next slide. So all my zines, with the exception of Cosmo Chancer, have, despite my intentions when I started writing, ended up touching on grief in some way. And I think it's a way of keeping, I mean, it was using Dad's photos as well, but keeping memories alive and keeping people and cats' names alive. And someone who read Nan, which is the inventively titled story of my Nan, said to me that the ancient Egyptians, you might all know this, I'd never heard it before, but say that we die twice. Once when we take our final breath, and the second time is the last time anyone says our name. And I thought, well, no one's going to die on my watch a second time, so I think that's what I have been doing. Even like something like Superstitions is just anecdotal about my mum's side of the family coming up with these ridiculous superstitions, but it was still writing about people who aren't here anymore and keeping their little stories alive and passing them on to whoever may be interested. And Nazare is, again, a very inventive title. It's a place in Portugal and it's pictures of that. But these are Dad's pictures from 1961. And we rediscovered them, along with the thousands and thousands of digital and print photos. We had like a surf resort with great big hotels now. But my parents and their friends never had any money, but used to pile into a hired van or car and drive down through Europe. Didn't speak any languages, didn't really know where they were going, but they ended up in a campsite in Nazare, and they were sharing the beach with the fishermen and their families, and the fishermen gamely put up for my dad taking all these pictures. And Tom and I found ourselves sort of travelling vicariously, not just to somewhere hot and sunny, but like through time, through these pictures. So, I mean, this is probably a good place to say that when you do something like this, you do it, you want other people to enjoy it, but really the person that's benefited from all of this the most, surprise, is me, because it's a kind of way of working through loss and just, you know, it was also coping with not being able to go anywhere and being fed up and stuck in Penge in January. And yeah, while I'm on the cheery, so yes, would you believe, while I'm on this line, but this is Vince, who was our Colossive Chief of Staff after Sid, and we only had Vince for just over a year, and he was hit by a car, and we were devastated, and also thinking, you know, I thought, oh, why do I feel like this when there's so many terrible things going on in the world? But, you know, again, if it matters to you, it matters. And a couple of days after Vince died, I was on my own at home feeling terrible, just kept replaying those last 5 minutes, and then, you know, how do I get out of it? How do I stop it? And I start to write. So, mainly, this is an attempt to point out how beginnings and endings are just a tiny, tiny bit of our lives, and really it's the bit in the middle, it's all the little stories joined together that matter. So it's a bunch of anecdotes about Vince, but then because it was me and the nature of it, it's also structured around those first 3 days and how I felt about grief. And the 3rd day after Vince died was the anniversary of my mum dying, which I did then question, why am I marking this horrible date when so many, you know, there's all the other days in between where nothing happened or lovely things happened, and, you know, I'm not thinking, oh, this is the anniversary of us going into Croydon and buying a school uniform, so why did that particular horrible day? And also, Laura told me it was St Gertrude's Day, the day after Vince died. And St Gertrude, it turns out, is the patron saint of cats, and that really, really helped, particularly because my great-granny was called Gertrude, and I never knew that before. So again, it's little stories being passed on that make a big difference and help us through the tricky times. So I think, as I say, nobody benefits from telling your story more than you do, and it can serve so many purposes. Is it time for the intermission? Will we change?
Yes.
Yeah. And this, right, you need to change.
Yeah.
But this is Gertie and Gracie, who are the current Colossive tutors.
See, we've got a tie. And then stop learning. But this is Vince doing his stuff with his bow pullers there, helping out in the production process. He was always very keen to get involved. Right, so doesn't allude to earlier. I grew up absolutely loving comics, but couldn't draw, and I know everyone can draw, but you know, I couldn't make it work the way I wanted it to. So, you know, I was very sad, but you know, I had to accept it and you know, find things I could do, because you know, I like to think of myself as a creative person. I want to produce things. So one of the things I can do is fold bits of paper and stick them together. So High Precision Ghosts was our very first zine. It's a bit of sort of book art frippery. As you can see, it's sort of hinged around 3 spines, so each time you read it and play about with it, you get different combinations of images and different associations, and they're all found images, which, you know, allude to sort of, you know, there's a hint of a sort of Lovecraftian, sort of Faustian kind of narrative there. And like I said, every time you read it, it comes up slightly differently. It's inspired by, I always liked artist films with split screens and multi-screens and, you know, images playing against each other and creating that kind of associations. So, you know, work with what you have, but you know, carry on learning. So the initial one was just photocopied at work, stapled roughly together, and I was selling it at the communal table here. But then I got it printed a little bit nicer. I started hand sewing it. I made a limited edition hardback because I sort of, you know, experimented a bit more with bookbinding courses and things like that. So, you know, in a nutshell, that shows one, you know, simple-ish project, but you know, you can carry on giving it a gloss and embellishing it as you pick up new skills. And similarly, the other zine that I bought here that first time, Ad Astra per Croydon, which is the history of Croydon Spaceport. And again, I had a vague notion that it was going to be, you know, the history of this mythical municipal space program, but didn't really know what it was going to look like or how I was going to tell it. But then Jay mentioned Flickr earlier. On Flickr, the photo sharing site, there's Flickr Commons, which is where institutions and galleries and museums dump, you know, great archives of copyright-free images. Unfortunately, 2 of the institutions were NASA and the San Diego Air and Space Museum, which you can imagine was absolutely wealth of imagery in that some of it funny, some of it a bit odd, and just sort of started to see funny images and think of a joke that might be a weird incident that happened, and that kind of led on to the notion of it being in the style of a sort of fairly pompous local history pamphlet, the sort of thing retired majors write about their neighbourhood. And it just sort of, once I developed the form of it, and this is a key thing, if you're not sure where you're going with an idea, once you find the right form for it, and what it might look like and sound like and feel like, then, I mean, in this case, it pretty much wrote itself once I got the notion of these found images and, the sort of weird juxtaposition of this stuff going on in Croydon. So, found material, given a bit of a flourish through my imagination. And another zine which worked in a similar way, things my dad saw but never bothered mentioning. These was more of Jane's dad's images. Like Jane said, he used to go out pretty much every day with his freedom pass, going up to London, seeing what was going on. And he always seemed to know when there were demonstrations or product launches or press photo shoots. And because he, ostensibly looked like a harmless little old man, he'd always managed to wriggle his way in. He'd get where water couldn't, and he'd get right up the front with the professional photographers. And this image was the one we just stumbled across and thought, well, what? And we thought, well, we've got to do something with that. And after that, we just sort of, we went through his photos and we put them into themes, and we've done 2 books. Things my dad saw but never bothered mentioning, and more things my dad saw but never bothered mentioning, which we've got upstairs. But it was just, again, Jane's legacy, this archive of photos from Gordon, it was just too good not to, to make a product that would A, make people smile, B, reflect, what was going on in London in the 90s and 90s and 10s slightly. And just a way of commemorating Gordon and keeping his archive going, and he put a lot of effort into his photography, so it's just nice to keep it out there.
It's more, isn't it?
Yes, oh, sorry, that's true. So it's an average day in the life of Gordon. the amused look on the fellow's face here as he's overtaken by the pantomime horse is great. Obviously the anti-war demo, Pride, and zombies. I think that was a game launch, wasn't it? And they invited all the zombie cosplayers to come to Leicester Square. And,
I think we googled it. That didn't volunteer the information.
Okay, so again, the notion of working with what you've got. Tracy Pitcher, one of our collaborators, she doesn't really exist. I mean, this is make a virtue of your shortcomings. So because I can't draw, I had this notion for a zine called Skating for Godot, which we all look like, or in what form it's going to come out. So eventually it's on the idea of Torbert and Dean juxtaposed with just the notion of them performing a production of Skating for Godot. So you'd have bits from the text with them. But because I wasn't going to be able to draw them, so I thought, well, I can't draw, but what I can do is trace a picture. So hence Tracy Pitcher. Which not everyone realises that they don't get the gag, but just make a feature of the wonkiness, because I know I can't pretend this is fantastic graphic art, but make a deal of that, and that's part of the joke really. And of course, no one was suddenly going to buy this if he said, buy Tom Murphy on the front, because who's Tom Murphy? So coming up with this alternative persona, then that enables us to create a bit of a spoof biography around Tracy and her eccentric sort of lifestyle. And then she ended up collaborating with Jenny Holton. Again, came up with a whole backstory for that, where Jenny Holton had been holidaying in the UK. I don't know if everyone knows who Jenny Holton is. She's an American artist who does these sort of text art statements, aphorisms. And she ended up sponsoring a non-league football club in Anglia and putting her mottos on the shirts. And again, traced pictures of footballers from the official archive of this fictional football club. So, just use the wonkiness is my motto. Another zine called The Testing Site I brought on with us, which again, this was my photographs, but recreated the mysterious French filmmaker and photographer Jean-Paul Marceau, and created a whole personality for him, sort of grey cheap recluse. And so just do these photos when we went to a place called Orford Nest, which is on the East Coast, which is an old military research station, which is now a nature reserve. But it's fantastically atmospheric with all these ruined buildings around. So I took a series of photos and thought, well, I should be able to use these in some way. So then I created a kind of, again, metafictional sort of story about a parapsychologist who might have been a sort of experiment there which went wrong and was hushed up. So then I wrote an introduction about that, and about the person who wrote the book, supposedly exposing all this, which, it's all made up, but, I just quite like that, creating something, and, it's obviously not, it's, fairly obviously not true, but, I wanted it to be enough of it that it might get people's thinking, well, I've never heard of this. So it's like with Crone Spaceboy, a lot of people say, I did not know about this. And it's like, this. So, and again, this was something using the virtues of, turning your shortcomings into virtues. Because this is very small print run, I always like the sort of handmade element of doing it. So, the photos printed, then I printed the text on translucent paper, so it sort of sits over the photo, stuck a sort of clear plastic cover on it, bound it together with a clip, so it feels like a sort of official dossier sort of thing. So, it creates that sort of, sorry about terrible word, verisimilitude, just that it feels like it should be a genuine artifact, but of course it's just layers of made up nonsense really, but if you do it with enough conviction it might sound plausible. So more generally, tools, the technological engine that drives Colossive is a 2009 edition of Photoshop, and mostly done in OpenOffice Writer as well, and bookbinding tools that fit in a cigar box. So that's essentially what drives Colossive. So user limitations. If you're a creative dead end, maybe just pick up a couple of magazines, cut them up, make collages, put words together, put images together with words, turn things around, pin them down. Work with what you've got and see where it goes. And something at some stage will spark the way forward. So,
yeah. We're speeding up now.
Yeah, we're
nearly there. But, so, read and listen actively to other people's stories. It's stating the obvious. And to illustrate this, I was going to get a carefully curated selection of zines and comics, and then I turned around and I saw this and I thought I'm never going to find them, and we've got to do this presentation tomorrow, so that's what I came up with. But obviously, everyone waved to reader. Obviously, read as much as you can and beg and borrow rather than buy. To make sure you can...
Except for today.
Except for obviously. But as well as that, this I've gone all mournful again, but these are just the pictures I've used to illustrate this point. Talk to people and ask questions where you can, and not just because we're all going to be dead one day, but also, while you have the opportunity to connect with people on social media, as Tom was saying earlier, or just, you happen to see someone, and I think we're all interested in one another, but we don't like to give it away. I've quite often stood with people when they're telling me stuff and they assume I know things already, and instead of saying, sorry, what do you do for a living, I'm just sort of going, yeah. And then I don't know enough, so I think, especially if you're a bit socially awkward, as we...
Not what we are.
You. But our absolute horror is those events where they say go around the room and introduce yourself. And if you're one of the last ones, you're not listening to anything anyone else says. What am I going to say? And then you've missed all these stories. So basically, just be inquisitive and interested, which everyone is anyway, but, try and do it actively, and that's where all the stories came from. Tom years ago still managed to do a comic that featured this photograph that Tom inherited when his mum and dad died, but we have absolutely no idea who these people are.
It's interesting, sorry to interrupt, I did that comic it was shortly after my dad died in 1993. And, it very much encapsulates the themes we just talked about today, because I had all these photos, and like these two chaps here, presumably working with my dad or whatever, I had no idea who they were, but I just couldn't throw the photos away, because I thought, well, hang on, this is all that possibly remains of this moment, especially in pre-digital days, I thought. So I just hung on to these photos, didn't know who they were.
It's easy to throw away pics of scenery, isn't it, but not people.
Yeah, and you just feel like somehow you're keeping that story going, even if you don't know what the story is.
I think there's not another slide in this section, is there? That surprised me.
No, there is.
No, okay.
Okay, the penultimate section you'll be pleased to hear. Don't overthink it, get on with it and finish it, which might sound easier said than done, but I think it's essential, because nothing kills, more projects, more than procrastination. We all, we've done it, get on with it. So, it's a bit of a cliche, but creativity is like a muscle. The more you use it, the more you develop it. A while ago I did an MA, while I was doing a full-time job as well. It was quite a heavy workload, but little and often really worked for me. Every day just do 10 or 15 minutes rather than thinking, I'll get to the end of the week and I'll do a fantastic all-nighter and crack it then. But because that just gets, whatever your project is, whatever your material is, it just gets it percolated in your brain, and then quite often, your subconscious takes over. So if one day you're stuck on a problem and you leave it there, the next day you'll sit down to it and you'll be surprised how often your subconscious has worked out what it is you need to do. So that's always very nice. And no amount of preparation is better than just getting stuck in. I love that feeling of when you're actually working on something and it takes on a life of its own. It's like a fire starts to grow and it surprises you and it goes in directions you weren't expecting, and something totally different. Well, not totally different, but you couldn't have predicted the way it was going to go, and it becomes richer and stranger than you might have expected. So the ultimate moment, you feel like you're struggling to keep up with this story that's developing, which is a fantastic feeling. And again, stating the obvious to a degree, but get things finished, work on something that there's an end point to, because you get so much more satisfaction from just doing a one-page full zine and getting that finished and done, than getting bogged down in some massive 20-book comic series or whatever. And that's why these photos, this is why people do unboxing videos, because it is a thrill, and you get, we sort of get into printing up professionally, just small things like that, but finishing something, if you put it together yourself, even better, but just opening the box, and here's, the thing you've nursed through from the vaguest of notions, in my case, to working out what it's going to be and putting it together and reworking it and reiterating it, and eventually you've got this finished product. And it's just fantastic when you've done the work and then you can sit back and hand it out to people. So the work is its own reward, really. That's when you're onto something, when you're just really enjoying the experience of doing it, and then when it finishes, you can pat yourself on the back. Because you will be pleased, things don't always turn out as you imagine they would, but generally, you've got somewhere you might not have expected, so that's fab. And this is kind of where it started and how it's going on at the new year. So this was our first official fair. This was Catford Comic and Zine Fair in 2018. Yeah. So our first little handful of, the old black and white copy of Skater for God. Oh yeah, so that started off with just black and white photocopy, now the rise of the printing course, so now it's the pink and blue version. How precision goes and what like. And then this was our comeback gig at Brixton earlier this year. And now we've lost count. Probably about 65 or 70 zines, including all the cartographies, doing over 40 odd of those. And all the little sort of 2 quid zines we've done, we try and make things accessible price-wise rather than 30 quid.
And in just 4 years we've travelled all the way from Catford to Brixton, so that is an inspiration.
Life is a journey. Take that away, yeah. So, just the joy of, I keep saying the work's its own reward, just getting stuff out there, you know, I'm not musical, but you know, I imagine it's like if you write a song and you know you end up with this unit. You know, that's how I sort of approach my zines. I just think, yeah, just a little thought that I'll develop into, you know, a discrete little thing and get it out there. And it's just so you know, and then you know, if people react to it and enjoy it. That's great. Which people have been very kind and reacting positively to us. So that's me done.
There's nearly all of this stuff because the next slide is just, that's the final point on see what we did there? On the Colossive manifesto, and it's just, yeah, whatever you're thinking, whatever your idea is, just start it. And it could be a wall, it could be a blank page, as I said, it could be the side of a train, but just get on with it.
Okay, and just to recap, there's the manifesto again.
There'll be a quiz.
And that's us done. So thank you very much for listening. And I think we were racing to the finish line there a bit, but yeah, any questions, please fire away. I'll need to turn around.
Anybody have any questions?
I was going to click that on the slides.
Oh, of course. Well, if you're, oh yeah.
Thank you.
I think if you press the arrow to...
Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to use myself.
Where did you learn about printing? Because I'm looking at printing a lot of different formats. Where do you recommend people go to kind of learn?
We do it, I mean, just online digital print. I mean, most of our zines just mix Sam and Doxu, who are very accessible, you know, interfaces. You just upload the stuff and print them. It's all very easy
Trial and error.
Their projects. So. And a lot of the, you know, folding and stitching, pearl, sausage fingers, that's me, does it. You know, you can imagine these cartographies, they're quite laborious, but you know, it's worth it. You know, you produce a lovely sort of physical thing. That's part of the joy of them. People sort of, you know, when people figure out how they work and just, you know, it springs open. It's just very pleasing. But you know, photocopying and stapling is just as valid. I mean, that's, you know, that's the bedrock of zine culture and DIY culture. So,
Did you have a question?
I have got a question. Have the boxes of zines taken over your house?
yes, they absolutely have. It's
Yeah.
an obstacle course. Yeah. If we need to turn on the light, turn on the lamp or something, it's
Yeah.
clambering over them, catching them across them, and knock them
especially
over.
since the cartographers, because they're all in, you know, for Tom to fold, the single sheets are all in big boxes in our living room, which is the only space for them.
Yeah.
So I'm often complaining about living on an obstacle course, you know, going
Maybe a
across-
bruised shin from banging into a box of cartography.
Well,
Oh, sorry, no, I just have one more question. How many sort of projects do you have on the go at any one time? Do you have lots of things that are sort of started but you're not sure whether they're leading you yet?
No, we're pretty good now at getting things to completion. I mean, the cartography's, you know, the whole overall thing is an ongoing thing as we're getting in touch with people. And, you know,
I think we get stuck at the anything's better than a blank page. We need to take our own advice because I, you know, have 4 ideas and I haven't done a single thing for any of them. And then once you start, and having a deadline like today made us speed up and do stuff, didn't it? The things that have been brewing for
yeah.
months, if not years.
Yeah. And we're trying to expand a bit as well, working with other people. So I'm currently working on a coming series, like editing it with a writer-artist, which hopefully that'll be able to portable in November. But you know, that's a different sort of, you know, a different process. We're getting used to how that works. Different kind of rhythm and timeline.
okay, thank you guys.
We've all
We've
been-
got more
And we're in
upstairs.
table 13 upstairs, so if you want to come and grab a manifesto.
Anyone else?
Awesome, of course, I'll let you know what people have done.